June 6, 1944. 4:48 in the morning. Somewhere above the English Channel, an American paratrooper from the 101st Airborne grips the side of a shaking C-47 transport plane and tries to steady his breathing. He is 19 years old. He has vomit on his boots from turbulence. The red jump light above the door flickers as anti-aircraft fire rises from the darkness below. Nobody inside the aircraft can clearly see the ground. Thick clouds cover Normandy. Wind tears against the fuselage. Hard enough to shove the plane sideways. The briefing had sounded simple. Jump behind enemy lines. Secure the roads. Slow the German counterattack before the beaches open. But something is already wrong. Pilots are off course. Formation lights have disappeared. Nobody knows exactly where they are. And somewhere below them, German soldiers are waking to sounds that should not exist. Engines. Explosions. Gunfire from places where no fighting should be happening. Within the next 24 hours, thousands of German defenders stationed along the Normandy coast will watch everything they believed about war collapse in front of them. Their commanders had promised them an unbreakable wall. Their officers had promised that any invasion would drown in blood before touching French soil. Instead, many of those same soldiers would spend D-Day trapped inside bunkers, staring through smoke at an invasion force so massive it seemed impossible to understand. Years later, German survivors would describe the same feeling again and again. Shock. Not fear. Not panic. Shock. Because what arrived on June 6 was not simply an invasion. It was industrial war on a scale Germany could no longer match. And before the day ended, some German officers had already begun asking a terrifying question. Had they already lost France before the battle even started? To understand why, you have to begin with a dangerous illusion. By the spring of 1944, Adolf Hitler genuinely believed Western Europe had become impossible to invade. Stretching from Norway to the border of Spain stood what Nazi propaganda proudly called the Atlantic Wall, thousands of miles of bunkers, artillery batteries, machine gun nests, anti-tank traps, and minefields built to crush any Allied landing before it could gain momentum. To ordinary Germans, it sounded unstoppable. To soldiers stationed there, it looked terrifying. Concrete bunkers overlooked. Beaches carefully measured for overlapping fields of fire. Wooden stakes topped with explosives waited beneath the tide. Steel obstacles sat hidden underwater, designed to rip apart landing craft before troops could even step onto shore. Along Omaha Beach alone, German positions covered nearly every possible approach. Machine guns had been sighted to overlap perfectly. Mortars stood ready behind hills. Artillery batteries waited farther inland. If enemy soldiers landed, they would be trapped inside what many German officers privately called a kill zone. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had spent months strengthening defenses after studying Allied air superiority. He had seen what happened in North Africa. He understood something many German commanders still refused to accept. If the Allies established even a small foothold in France, their naval firepower and endless supplies could make removal nearly impossible. Rommel reportedly told officers that the first 24 hours would decide everything. The war, he believed, would be won or lost on the beaches. And yet, despite all the concrete, steel, and confidence, the German defense carried a hidden weakness. One built not from poor courage or weak soldiers, but from dangerous assumptions. Because German commanders were preparing for the wrong invasion. Many believed the main Allied landing would strike near Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. It made sense. Shorter crossing distance, closer supply lines, more strategic value. German intelligence expected Normandy to be nothing more than a diversion. The Allies knew this, and they exploited it brilliantly. Fake radio traffic flooded German intercept stations. Rubber tanks appeared in southeast England. Entire phantom armies were invented. Even Germany's spies unknowingly fed false information back to Berlin. At the center of this deception stood one of the most unlikely weapons of the war. A quiet American general named George Patton. To the Germans, Patton looked like the obvious invasion commander. Aggressive, famous, unpredictable. They became so convinced that he would lead the main assault at Calais that even after D-Day began, Hitler still hesitated to move critical armored divisions. He believed Normandy might only be the opening act. But deception alone was not enough. Nature itself almost ruined everything. On June 4th, Violent weather slammed into the English Channel. Heavy waves battered landing craft. Wind speeds climbed. Low clouds ruined visibility. Senior German meteorologists studied conditions and reached a comforting conclusion. No invasion was possible. Not now. Not for days. Some commanders relaxed. Others traveled away from headquarters. Rommel himself left France for Germany, hoping to spend time with his wife and personally deliver her birthday shoes purchased in Paris. 4. German officers exhausted by years of war, the weather felt reassuring. Nobody invades in storms. Nobody launches history's biggest amphibious assault into rough seas. Nobody takes risks that insane. But across the channel, one weather report changed everything. Allied meteorologists detected something German forecasters had missed. A brief opening. A narrow weather gap. Barely enough time. General Dwight Eisenhower now faced one of the most difficult decisions of the war. If he delayed, tides and moonlight conditions would disappear for weeks. If he moved forward and failed, thousands would drown before reaching France. The pressure was crushing. More than 150,000 soldiers waited for orders. Thousands of ships sat ready. Entire nations held their breath. Inside a tense meeting during the early hours of June 5, commanders debated endlessly. Rain still hammered windows. Conditions remained dangerous. Finally, Eisenhower leaned back and made one of the most important decisions in military history. We'll go. Just 2 words. But those words sent the largest invasion fleet ever assembled moving toward occupied Europe. And while German commanders slept, argued, or trusted the weather, something strange had already begun in the skies over Normandy. Paratroopers were falling from the darkness. Not in organized lines. Not according to plan. Chaos had taken over. Aircraft drifted off course. Pilots struggled against weather and enemy fire. Some American units landed miles from intended positions. Others dropped directly into swamps, rivers, or German strongpoints. Small groups found themselves isolated without radios or maps. At first glance, it looked catastrophic. Yet something unexpected happened. The confusion itself became a weapon. German commanders began receiving impossible reports. Enemy soldiers everywhere. Gunfire in multiple locations. Roads blocked. Bridges threatened. Some officers believed thousands more paratroopers had landed than actually existed. Dummy parachutists carrying explosives added even more confusion. Nobody understood the scale of the threat. Nobody knew where the main attack was coming. And while Germany struggled to make sense of scattered chaos inland, something even more terrifying slowly emerged across the horizon. At first light, German defenders looked toward the sea. And for a moment, many thought their eyes were lying. Because the ocean itself appeared to move. Not dozens of ships. Not hundreds. Thousands. Warships. Destroyers. Battleships. Landing craft. Transport ships. A steel horizon stretching farther than many soldiers believed possible. Some later said it looked less like a fleet and more like an entire civilization arriving at once. And then the bombardment began. At 5:30 in the morning, the silence ended. The first naval shells slammed into German coastal positions with a violence few defenders had ever experienced. Concrete shook. Windows shattered. Entire bunkers disappeared beneath smoke and dust. Along the Normandy coast, German soldiers who had spent months trusting their fortifications suddenly found themselves trapped inside structures that no longer felt safe. For years, propaganda had promised them these defenses were unstoppable. Now, walls cracked under repeated impacts. Communication lines snapped. Telephone systems failed. And outside, the horizon continued filling with ships. The scale of firepower was almost impossible to process. Battleships anchored offshore unleashed shell after shell toward coastal batteries. Destroyers moved dangerously close to shore to target machine gun nests hidden in cliffs. Naval guns so massive they could fire shells heavier than small automobiles now pounded defensive positions nonstop. For many German defenders, the psychological damage arrived before the physical destruction. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Some later admitted they believed Germany had already lost the moment they saw the size of the invasion fleet. Because this was no raid. This was not another failed Allied experiment. This looked permanent. At Omaha Beach, however, the fighting quickly became something far worse than Allied planners expected. Bombardment had missed several German strongpoints. Machine gun nests survived. Mortar Teams remained operational. When American landing craft dropped their ramps shortly after 6:30 a.m., chaos exploded instantly. Men stepped directly into machine gun fire. Others drowned under the weight of soaked equipment. Landing craft struck underwater obstacles and exploded. Smoke mixed with seawater. Officers disappeared. Entire units became trapped behind narrow strips of sand with nowhere to hide. For some soldiers, survival lasted only seconds. One American veteran later remembered the sound more than anything else. Machine gun fire. Screams. Artillery impacts. Voices disappearing before conversations could finish. At Omaha, German defenders still possessed deadly firing angles over the beach. The bluffs above gave perfect visibility. Every movement seemed exposed. For several terrifying hours, the invasion looked dangerously close to failure. And yet something strange began happening. Despite enormous casualties, the Americans kept coming. Destroyed landing craft were replaced. Fresh troops continued arriving. Men separated from units formed new groups with strangers. Junior officers improvised. Sergeants made battlefield decisions usually reserved for commanders. No grand plan held the beach together anymore. Momentum did. One bunker at a time, small groups began climbing cliffs. Some crawled through minefields. Others attacked machine gun positions from unexpected directions. German defenders, who had expected organized assaults, suddenly found exhausted. Furious American soldiers appearing behind positions thought untouchable. The carefully designed kill zones began breaking apart. Meanwhile, Germany faced another problem. Its greatest military strength, armored counterattack, never arrived in time. For years, German strategy relied on fast movement. Strike hard. Counterattack immediately. Push invaders back before they gain momentum. But on D-Day, confusion and command paralysis slowed everything. Critical panzer divisions remained frozen awaiting authorization. Hitler himself had kept personal control over several armored units. The problem? Nobody wanted to wake him. Some officers feared making decisions without permission. Others hesitated, believing Normandy might still be a distraction. Hours disappeared. And in war, hours can decide nations. By the time German armor finally moved, the Allies had already secured footholds. Even worse, every road toward Normandy had become deadly. Allied fighter aircraft dominated the skies. Columns moving during daylight risked destruction from above. Trains stalled. Fuel shortages worsened. Convoys hid beneath trees waiting for darkness. German commanders soon discovered an uncomfortable truth. They could still fight, but they could no longer move freely. The war had changed, and Germany was losing the new version. Above Normandy, Allied aircraft overwhelmed the Luftwaffe almost completely. German soldiers waiting desperately for air support often saw nothing. Or worse, only 2 or 3 aircraft briefly appearing before vanishing again. The promise of German air superiority had become memory. In many areas, Allied planes attacked roads, railways, tanks, bridges, and communication centers almost continuously. German officers increasingly described feeling hunted. Movement itself became dangerous. Every decision carried fear of sudden destruction from above. And while Germany struggled to react, the Allies kept building. Supplies landed non-stop. Fuel, ammunition, vehicles, medical equipment, food, fresh troops. Thousands upon thousands of men arriving every day. German commanders watching reports come in slowly realized something terrifying. This was not a battle they could simply survive. This had become a mathematical problem. Every hour favored the Allies. Every delay made victory harder. Every destroyed German tank took time to replace. American losses returned quickly. Factories overseas continued feeding the machine. One German officer later described the feeling bluntly. It was like fighting a country that never stopped arriving. Within days, cracks inside the German defense widened. Communication failures spread confusion. Units fought without understanding larger situations. Commanders received outdated information. Counterattacks failed. Some elite formations suffered losses they could barely replace. And psychologically, something even worse began happening. Confidence disappeared. The Atlantic Wall, once sold as unbreakable, had shattered in less than a day. The beaches had not become Allied graveyards. Instead, they had become entry points. By mid-June, German officers increasingly understood the truth they once refused to imagine. France might already be slipping away. And months later, after Germany's collapse, captured generals sat across tables from Allied interrogators trying to explain what happened. Some blamed air power. Others blamed fuel shortages. Many pointed toward overwhelming industry. All of those explanations were true. But underneath them existed something deeper. Germany had prepared for the wrong kind of war. They expected a battle of courage, fortifications, and tactical skill. What arrived in Normandy was something else entirely. An industrial avalanche. A military system combining deception, logistics, air power, naval dominance, and relentless reinforcement at a scale the world had never seen. The German soldier on Omaha Beach could still fight bravely. His machine gun could still kill. His bunker could still resist. But bravery cannot stop mathematics. And concrete cannot stop an enemy powerful enough to replace losses faster than you can create them. On June 6, 1944, Germany did not lose the war in a single day. But, on the beaches of Normandy, many of its soldiers quietly realized something they had never allowed themselves to believe. The war was no longer winnable. They were not watching an invasion. They were watching the beginning of the end.